everyone, and welcome. Have you ever noticed how different parts of the city kind of make you feel different? Like all energized walking through a busy plaza 1 minute?
And then totally drained when you're stuck on a crowded subway platform.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the city has a mood, right?
It totally does.
And that's what we're diving into today, psychogeography. Basically, how the city impacts our emotions and our mental well-being.
We'll be looking at all sorts of stuff, from the ideas of this Guy Debord, to something called the dérive.
Yeah, we've got some fascinating sources lined up, and
That's really going to make you think about how you experience your city.
I know I'm personally really excited to get into this whole concept of fluctuating time.
Oh yeah, that one's a trip, right? How time just seems to move differently depending on where you are in this city.
It's so true. Like walking through a park can feel like this long, luxurious stretch.
And then rush hour, it's like, poof, the day's gone.
Totally. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics.
Right, got to lay the groundwork.
So, what exactly is psychogeography?
Well, the term was coined by this French theorist named Guy Debord.
Okay, Debord.
Yeah, and his work can be pretty dense, but the core idea is actually quite straightforward.
Okay, good. Break it down for us.
So Debord was part of this group called the Situationist International,
Interesting name.
right? They were all about challenging the way we experience everyday life, especially in cities.
So, like shaking things up, making us see things differently.
Exactly. And for them, psychogeography wasn't just about, like, the physical layout of the city, the streets and buildings.
Right.
It was about the feelings those spaces evoke.
So, less of an objective map, more like an emotional map of the city.
You got it. It's about acknowledging that the city isn't just a collection of buildings, but like this dynamic psychological landscape.
I like that, a psychological landscape.
Yeah, and we interact with it on an emotional level all the time, whether we realize it or not.
Okay, so let's get concrete here. Picture this. You're walking down this narrow, dimly lit alleyway late at night.
Ooh, spooky.
Right. You're probably feeling a little uneasy, maybe even a little scared.
Definitely not my favorite place to be.
But then you merge into this wide open plaza, bathed in sunlight, and suddenly,
Relief.
exactly, you feel this surge of energy, maybe even a boost of confidence.
It's like the city just gave you a shot of espresso.
Right. And those contrasting feelings, that's exactly what psychogeography is all about.
Same city, different vibes.
And it reminds me of another term from our sources, the flâneur.
Ooh, fancy?
Yeah, it sounds a bit highfalutin, I know, but I think most of us have been a flâneur without even realizing it.
Oh, for sure. The flâneur is just an urban wanderer, someone strolling through the city, taking it all in.
You know, like Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye, wandering around New York, just observing things.
Yeah, classic flâneur.
Or think about those times you visited a new city and you find yourself just wandering down these side streets.
You know, those charming little alleys with the cute cafes and shops, and you're not even really going anywhere specific.
Just soaking it all up.
Yeah, it's almost meditative, isn't it?
It totally is. And that's the beauty of being a flern.
You're not just moving through space, you're actively engaging with your surroundings.
You notice the architecture, the little details, the way people interact, the light filtering through the trees.
And all that awareness
Hmm.
is where the real power of psychogeography lies.
It's about recognizing that the city's constantly communicating with us, shaping our moods, influencing our thoughts.
Even triggering memories.
And sometimes it's not always a positive impact, right? I mean, some urban designs can really impact our mental health in a negative way.
Oh, absolutely. Overcrowding is a huge one.
Oh yeah, think about being crammed into a packed subway car at rush hour.
Ugh, don't even get me started.
Yeah.
No personal space, all that noise.
It's like your body goes into fight or flight mode.
Right. Your pulse starts racing, you can't breathe, you get all irritable.
And our sources say that overexposure to that kind of crowding can actually have long-term negative effects like increased aggression.
It can even mess with your cognitive function.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that serious. So, what are we all doomed if we live in cities?
Not necessarily. Luckily, there are ways to design cities that actually promote well-being, even in the middle of all the hustle and bustle.
Okay, I'm listening because I need some of that.
One of the biggest things is public spaces.
Okay, I was going to say parks. I just feel so much calmer when I'm in a park, even if it's just a little one surrounded by buildings.
Parks are awesome. They're a perfect example of how we could use psychogeography to make cities better for us.
So what is it about parks?
Well, they give us this sense of openness, a break from all the hard lines and concrete.
You're surrounded by nature, fresh air, usually can find a place to just sit and chill.
It's like hitting pause on all that frenetic city energy.
It makes me think of cities like Copenhagen or Portland.
Yeah, they've really integrated nature into their urban design.
It shows there's just a different vibe, more relaxed, more human-centered.
They've recognized how important that is for people's well-being.
So it's not just about making the city look pretty, it's about actually making it healthier for us mentally.
Exactly. And our sources also talked about light and air, how they play a role too.
Yeah, what's that all about?
Well, natural light is super important for regulating our sleep cycles and our mood.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm definitely more energetic and productive when I'm getting enough sunlight.
And on the flip side, spending too much time in dim lighting can make you feel sluggish and down.
Totally. It's like those offices with the big windows and open floor plans.
They feel so different from the old school ones with tiny rooms and flickering fluorescent lights.
Right. Like they actually make you feel better, more creative.
It's all connected.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to another big element, architecture.
Because buildings definitely have personalities, right? Like a grand cathedral is going to give you a totally different feeling than a tiny basement apartment.
No doubt. Architecture's about way more than just looks.
Yeah, it's got to be functional too.
Oh yeah, but even beyond that, the way a building is designed, the materials, the scale, it all impacts us emotionally.
You're saying that being in a big open space with high ceilings can make us feel more free.
It can. It gives you more psychological breathing room.
Makes sense.
And being in a cramped space, on the other hand, can make you feel claustrophobic and anxious.
Oh yeah, I stayed in this tiny hotel room once and the ceiling was so low it felt like I was in a hobbit hole.
Oof, yeah, I can see that getting old fast.
And it's not just about the size, right? Different architectural styles can evoke different emotions.
Absolutely. Like, a sleek modern building might make you feel all efficient and futuristic.
And a historic building might give you that sense of awe and wonder.
You got it. And then there's the whole symbolic language of architecture, like landmarks.
Yeah, like the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty.
Those aren't just buildings. They represent ideas and emotions, and they shape how we see a city.
They tell stories about the city's past and its identity.
And all of that feeds into our experience of the urban environment.
It's fascinating, and we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right?
But before we get into even more detail, let's take a break.
Sounds good. We'll be back in a bit to talk about how our mode of transportation shapes our experience of the city.
That's right, so stay tuned because it's going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up. All right, so think about the last time you visited a new city.
Okay, yeah.
Did you mostly drive around, or did you do a lot of walking?
Good question. I usually try to walk as much as possible when I'm exploring a new place.
I bet you noticed things you wouldn't have seen from inside a car.
Oh, totally. All those little side streets and hidden alleys, the street art, the little cafes tucked away.
Exactly. Walking just makes you more aware of your surroundings,
Yeah.
You become a part of the city instead of just passing through it.
It's like the slow food movement, but for exploring cities.
I love that. You're savoring the experience, taking it all in.
Yeah, really appreciating the details.
And you're engaging all your senses, right? You feel the cobblestones under your feet, you hear conversations and music drifting out of windows, you smell fresh bread from the bakeries.
It's like a symphony of urban life.
Whereas in a car, you're kind of cut off from all that.
Yeah, you're in your own little bubble, just focused on getting from point A to point B.
It's like watching the city on TV instead of actually being in it.
And I think that can make you feel disconnected, like you're not really a part of the city.
It's true. And it's not just about cars, of course. Public transportation plays a big role, too.
Public transportation. Oh, man, that's a whole other conversation.
I know, right? It can be amazing, or it can be a nightmare.
Sometimes both at the same time.
But in terms of psychogeography, it's super interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, think about it. You're sharing this space with all these strangers.
All crammed in together, going to who knows where.
But there's this sense of collective movement, a shared experience of navigating the city.
It's like we're all in this together.
Yeah. And I've actually had some really cool conversations with people on public transportation.
Me too. You never know who you're going to meet.
Right. And those moments of connection, they can make you feel less alone in the city.
Like you're part of something bigger.
And our sources talked about how the quality of the public transportation system itself can impact your experience.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like if the system is clean and reliable,
Yeah.
it can actually make you feel good about your city.
It's like the city's taking care of you.
But if it's dirty and unreliable, it can make you feel frustrated and neglected.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of things that can make you feel a bit off, One of our sources mentioned this concept of fluctuating time.
Ah, yes, fluctuating time. So trippy.
It really is. Like, I swear, sometimes time just seems to slow down in certain parts of the city.
Right?
I remember walking through this old historic district in Europe, and it was like I was stepping back in time.
Yeah, all those centuries of history just kind of seeping into the present moment.
Exactly. But then I'd go to a busy shopping area, and it felt like time was on, fast forward.
Everything's so frantic and overstimulating.
It's like your brain can't keep up.
It's crazy how much our perception of time is influenced by our surroundings.
Yeah, like in a peaceful park, time can seem to stretch out forever.
There's space to think, to breathe, to just be.
It makes me wonder if we should be designing cities with more of those slow time spaces.
I think so too.
Hmm.
We need places where we can escape the constant rush.
Recharge and reconnect with ourselves.
And speaking of exploring the city in a more mindful way, this ties into another key concept, the dérive.
Ooh, yeah, the dérive. Tell me more about that.
So the dérive is like this unplanned urban adventure where you let your intuition guide you,
So no maps, no itineraries, just wandering wherever you feel like going.
pretty much. You might start out with a general direction in mind,
Okay.
but then you just see where the city takes you.
Sounds fun, but also a little scary, to be honest. I'm a planner. I like to know where I'm going.
I get it, but trust me, sometimes the best experiences come from getting lost.
You think so?
Definitely. The dérive is all about breaking out of your usual routines and seeing the city with fresh eyes.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Are there any, like, rules for doing a dérive?
Not really, but here are a few tips.
Lay 'em on me.
First, choose a starting point that sparks your curiosity.
Okay, like a neighborhood I've never been to before.
Exactly. Or a landmark you've always wanted to see up close, or even just a street corner that has a certain vibe.
All right, good starting point. Then what?
Once you're on the move,
Uh,
just be present and pay attention to your senses.
Sight, sound, smell, all that.
Yeah, and trust your intuition. If you feel drawn to a certain street or alleyway, just go for it.
Like following your gut?
That's it. You might stumble upon something amazing you never would have found otherwise.
That's cool. I like how the dérive encourages you to be more observant and curious.
It's like rediscovering the city as a playground for your imagination.
You mentioned that the dérive is becoming more and more relevant these days.
Yeah, it's true.
Why do you think that is?
Well, our cities are getting so crowded and technology-driven.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed and disconnected.
Exactly. The derive is like a way to reclaim your connection to the city, to make it feel more personal and meaningful.
And less like we're all just robots going through the motions.
I like that way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's about finding those moments of wonder and joy in the everyday urban landscape.
This is all making me wonder if we can actually design cities with psychogeography in mind.
You know, that's a great question, and it's something that's actually starting to happen.
Really? Tell me more.
Well, if we know that the city impacts us emotionally, why not design it in a way that makes us feel good?
That makes perfect sense. What would a psychogeographically aware city look like?
Well, I think it would have lots of things like walkable streets and green spaces and plenty of places for people to gather.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we already know those things can make us feel good.
Exactly. So imagine a city with wide sidewalks and trees everywhere that makes you want to stroll around and really experience the city.
Instead of just rushing to get somewhere.
Right, and instead of those big empty plazas, we'd have parks and gardens woven into the urban fabric, places where you could relax or meet up with friends.
I love that idea of bringing nature right into the heart of the city.
It's not just about making the city look prettier, either. Studies have shown that access to nature can actually reduce stress, improve mood, and even help us think better.
It's like a mental health boost built right into the city.
Exactly.
This makes me think about cities like Copenhagen with all those bike paths and pedestrian streets, or Singapore with its amazing vertical gardens.
Those are great examples. They show that we can create cities that are both efficient and enjoyable.
Cities that work for people, not just for cars and businesses.
Right. It's about putting human experience at the center of urban design.
But it can't all be about skyscrapers and big buildings, right? I feel like we also need those smaller, more intimate spaces.
You're absolutely right. Human scale design is super important.
Like those cute little streets you find in European cities where you feel a sense of history and charm.
Or those public squares that are perfect for hanging out and people watching.
Those spaces make you feel like you belong. You're part of a community.
And that sense of belonging is so important for our well-being.
It really is.
A psychogeographically aware city would also think about things like light, sound, and even smell.
Oh, yeah, we haven't talked much about those things, but I know they can have a huge impact on how we feel.
Right. Like, think about all the noise pollution in some cities, traffic sirens construction.
It's relentless.
It's exhausting,
Yeah.
and it's not good for us. A city designed with psychogeography in mind would try to reduce noise through things like green spaces that absorb sound or pedestrian
Or
zones.
maybe even incorporating more natural sounds like fountains and birdsong.
Exactly. It's about creating a soundscape that's calming and restorative instead of jarring and stressful.
And what about lighting? We talked about natural light earlier, but what about at night?
That's a great point. Instead of using those harsh streetlights, a psychogeographically aware city would use lighting that's more gentle and soothing.
Like those cities that use soft amber lighting in their historic districts.
It creates such a warm and inviting atmosphere.
It makes you feel like you're in a different time.
And then there's smell, which is often called the most evocative sense.
Smell. I never really thought about that in terms of urban design.
But it's so powerful. Smell can trigger memories and emotions more strongly than any other sense.
It's true, certain smells can instantly transport you back to a specific time and place.
So a psychogeographically aware city might incorporate fragrant gardens or make an effort to minimize unpleasant odors.
It's like creating a whole sensory experience that makes you feel good.
Exactly.
Wow, this whole conversation has been so fascinating. It's really made me think about cities in a whole new way.
I'm so glad to hear that.
It feels like I have a new set of tools for understanding how the city affects me.
And remember, you can use these tools to create your own little pockets of well-being in the city.
Oh, yeah.
Just start paying attention to how you feel in different spaces. Notice what kind of architecture inspires you, what sounds soothe you, what smells trigger positive memories.
So it's about becoming more aware of my surroundings.
Exactly. And then you can make choices about where you spend your time. Seek out those parks and green spaces, explore your city on foot, maybe even try a derive.
I think I just might.
I hope you do. And for our listeners, if you want to learn more about psychogeography, we'll be sharing some resources in the show notes.
That's right, so be sure to check those out. And in the meantime, keep exploring your city with fresh eyes and an open mind.
Because you never know what you might discover.
That's so true. And on that note, that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.